Hello, I'm Sauerkraut, creator of the Terraheim mod for Valheim, and today I'm going to be giving you guys just well, it's not going to be brief, a long overview of the mod, just kind of, not really edited, just kind of talking about things and kind of my thoughts and logic behind them. So, I kind of figured I'd start off talking about the weapons, because they're, well, about half of the mod after all, and there's quite a bit to say about them, so let's get started. I'm going to be tabbing in between stuff basically as needed, so you might get to see some spreadsheets. You know, all part of the fun. So yeah, starting off, when I originally decided to make kind of a weapon mod for Valheim, well, I suppose add a weapon extension to the base of the already released Terraheim. My more or less logic behind it was, well, there's a lot of gaps in the base game, like just a ton of them. The silver tier only has like 3-ish weapons, and actually I don't think even that. There's barely any weapons in the silver tier, and it's kind of disappointing because it means that you basically go up to the mountains, grab the wolf armor, and just enough stuff to make a Frostneer or two, and you're done. Which is a shame because I quite like the mountains. It's one of my favorite biomes in the game. And so I went through and I just added a bunch of missing weapons wherever I could find it. And so let's get a fucking particle. And so like, I went through, added in battle axes for pretty much every tier. I added in the particularly fun Greatclub off of one of my friend's suggestions, just because he wanted an early game two-handed weapon, because, you know, there isn't any, and I figured, well, why not have a fucking giant Unga Bunga club, because, I don't know, it's fun. This is actually a pretty effective weapon early on. Really suffers, it really kind of emphasizes what the two-handed weapons or the great axe is really specialized for. Gives you a kind of a really nice learning thing that this is not so much a 1v1 weapon, but a really good at crowd control. But aside from that, I added in, bronze battle axes. Actually, I'll just go through and start telling you guys what are the missing weapons I added. Quite a lot of them are battle axes. So you've got the, Greatclub, which is a battle axe, quote unquote. The bronze battle axe. Bronze battle axe is kind of interesting. Because, well, I originally added it as just a recolor of the normal battle axe. But I went through and in this last update went and gave them all unique models. And when I did that, I decided, hey, you know what always looks crazy and would be kind of fun, especially given that it's, bronze? If I base it off of a Bronze Age Viking axe. And so that's what the axe head is made of. That's why it's all weird and swirly. It's because the Bronze Age was just bonkers in terms of weapon designs. Because they could get really, really decorative with the whole casting material, because, I mean, if you're going to go ahead and make a mold for something, might as well put a little bit of time in, make it look good, because you're going to be able to use it quite a bit. And they understood that, even back then. Let's see, added in the silver battle axe as well, which is just the, it's just a pole axe. I think it kind of fit the sort of aesthetic that the silver weapons started going with, because the silver sword, if I remember right, is pretty elegant as far as, okay, oh wait, no, I'm stupid. It's pretty elegant as far as weapons in Valheim goes. Like, it looks frankly medieval, especially the hilt design. It looks a lot like those early army swords. And so I kind of took that and ran with it, and so you get all of the silver weapons are pretty elegant, pretty thin, but also have a very large amount of like proper medieval influence, which is why you get the silver battleaxe looking like a poleaxe. And there's another reason behind this, and that's because I think poleaxes are really fucking cool. Yeah, they're probably my favorite polearm weapon as far as those go. The Blackmetal Battleaxe is another one of those battle axes that got added in. And, well, the Blackmetal Battleaxe, like the Blackmetal tier Battleaxe, always just kind of had an interesting life as far as the course of Terraheim. Because when it started out, when I first did the weapon expansion, I added in the Blackmetal Axehammer, which originally kind of performed that purpose. But it ended up migrating over to being more of a sledge when I was playing around with movesets and stuff. It was kind of fun to have a sledge for the Blackmetal tier. Excuse me. But the actual weapon itself, as I desperately try to model it with the cape clipping in, is based off of an Irish axe, a two-handed axe, that has a pretty neat name that I just cannot remember right now. But it's a pretty neat looking weapon in my opinion. Though I do think it's probably not the best fit for the whole battle or black metal aesthetic, since that's a little more, I guess, crude looking. In any case, it looks. I think it still looks fine. But yeah, that's all like the additional battle axes that got added in. There's also, of course, the Forstasca, which is a which is kind of a Frostneer alternative in the silver tier. Let me spawn it in. Fun fact about the name is it literally means frost axe in Old English, because I am nothing if not unoriginal. The Model 2 for it is actually something I had just lying around. I made it for a mod for the game Blade and Sorcery, because I don't know, I wanted some new axes, and kind of so I just had this one lying around, and I figured it fit just fine. It's a little, does mean it's a little high poly in comparison to the rest of the weapons, but it doesn't stick out too much, I don't think. Aside from that, it's kind of the idea behind it was going to be a sort of a Frostner alternative, with a bit more focus on the actual frost damage and a lot more just raw damage. So if you're running up against something that was immune to frost, I don't think there's any enemies in the game that are, but, you know, nice to have. Coming up again and just kind of missing weapons in the silver tier, there's the silver Kresja, or, well, it's the silver Atgeir, but it's called the silver Kresja because it's a it's based off a interpretation of, well, it's probably the same weapon as the Atgeir, but it's based off of an interpretation I saw that for the Viking kind of two-handed polearm hewing spear kind of thing, because even the game's vanilla Atgeirs are also, I believe they're actually based off of some company that ended up deciding to make their own interpretation of it, because there's no existing examples of this weapon just kind of lying around, but it's mentioned a lot in like the Poetic Eddas, or I guess it's not the Poetic, but like just the general like Viking mythologies and stories. It's mentioned a lot, and that kind of leads to one of my absolute favorite lines from one of these Eddas, and it's oh, hold on, I'm going to pause this, I need to find it. Alright, I managed to dig it up. So, in chapter 45 of Grettis Saga, Thorbjorn knocked loudly on the door at Atli's farm, then hid. When Atli went to the door, Thorbjorn rushed up holding a spear in two hands and ran Atli through. When he took the blow, Atli said, "Broad spears are in fashion these days," and fell dead. Which is just just fucking hilarious. I don't know, but it's ended up kind of combing through a lot of stuff when I was making a design for this thing. It did end up getting stretched out. It's not, the blade's not supposed to be nearly as long, but it got kind of stretched out just because I needed to have it match roughly the same length as the base game's Atgeir's. Yeah, I'm quite a fan of it. It does kind of the usual silver damage of having some speared and some piers. Let's see, what else is there in terms of... Oh yeah, the silver dagger. It's an obsidian dagger, but you know. So yeah, I went for kind of this obsidian blade-based design, mostly because, well, obsidian is a pretty common material for pre-metalworking civilizations, or pre-iron or Bronze Age civilizations, to use for weapons. There's a couple different actual Stone Age civilizations that ended up using that pretty heavily. But I ended up going with it just because, there is already a silver dagger. It's the Parrying Dagger. And I thought about just reusing the model, but I didn't really want to. And I also wanted to give more of a use to the to Obsidian, because if you're really not that into archery in Valheim, like I'm okay with archery. I'm not a fan of it as much as running up and stabbing someone in the face. But if you're not super interested in archery, you just you basically break one block of obsidian and you have all the obsidian you're going to need for the rest of the game, because you're not going to make any obsidian arrows or anything. So that's why it's an obsidian dagger. It also matches with the Chosen armor set, which is also crafted pretty heavily with obsidian. And I figured that would be kind of a nice way to make kind of that connection, because the Obsidian Dagger does have some interactions with the Chosen set that I'm probably going to get around to. That I'm going to get around to talking when I get to the armor portion of this Rant, whatever the fuck this is. But yeah, so the Silver Dagger was also something that was just missing in the base game. Just for basically no reason, it just didn't exist. So here it is, it's back. I'm a little disappointed you can't really see it, because the blade geometry is actually really neat and detailed, but you can't really pick it up just because the blade is so small and you can't really zoom in that much to get a good look at it, but oh well. Let's see, is there any more silver tier weapons that have just been, like, completely forgotten? Oh wait, no, there's the Iron Knife. Hold on, let me spawn that bad boy. Spawn Iron. So, the Iron Knife is based off of a sax, which is, well, it's essentially a really, really big knife that the Anglo-Saxons and basically all of Europe decided to use starting maybe a couple hundred years after the fall of the Roman Empire. This is another one of those weapons I had, or the model for it's another one of them that I just had kind of lying around, as I had, again, originally made it for that same blade and sorcery mod. But yeah, it's a pretty nice little weapon. I'm quite a fan of it. I do wish I had a larger version of it, but I couldn't make I thought about making like the Blackmetal Greatsword, also a sax, but I could not get that to look right. It always looked way too chunky and clunky. It just didn't look good. So, alas, the sax will remain here. Yeah, the description's kind of a call back to the fact that these were incredibly common weapons. Basically, everyone had them because they were essentially the medieval equivalent of a machete, or I guess early medieval equivalent. So they're pretty nice little weapons. I like them. Let's see. Any other missing weapons? Oh, there's the Blackmetal Pickaxe, which I don't really need to go too much into detail about. It's a pickaxe and it's black metal. I think it's literally just the iron pickaxe recolored. Um, oh, there's the Blackmetal Spear. Let's see. Oh, damn it. Okay. So the Blackmetal Spear, which actually has its old icon still. Oops. The Blackmetal Spear is it's actually a purely fantasy design. I don't think I really referenced anything for it. I just kind of came up with it. Wanted something a bit more choppy and angular than what the Blackmetal Greataxe ended up looking like, because I kind of realized after I made the Blackmetal Greataxe's model that it didn't quite fit. So when I started doing the model for the Blackmetal Spear, I really tried to change that, make it look a little more natural for the technology tier. Yeah, it's got some little barbs on it. I'm sure there's probably some use for them, but it's pretty much purely fantasy. I did try to keep it more or less. Well, one of the things that I noticed when I was playing through the game is all of the weapons and equipment, with the exception of, say, the battle axe, is actually pretty well proportioned. They're all about the right size. Nothing seems way too big, you know? Like, they're all pretty realistic, quote-unquote, weapons. And so when I was making the weapons and models for this, I either based them off of existing designs, or in the case of the Blackmetal Spear, I tried to make it a reasonable weapon that someone could potentially use if they wanted. If like, this is something that I think you could maybe find in existence somewhere. I don't think you'd find any particular culture using it, but oh well. I don't know. It's neat. It's a spear. Yeet. I believe that's about it for just kind of missing weapons. So you know, I'm just going to start from the top, going over like the added weapons. Like, these are the weapons that I explicitly added, even though they don't have a exactly missing equivalent. Like, it's not the, oh, this is the Blackmetal Spear or whatever. It's like, this is an entirely new thing. So to that end, we're going to start off with Þunorwyrm. Guess what? It's also using Old English for the name. That will come up a lot. I am quite the fan of Old English in terms of just how it looks and how it sounds. This is a cool language. We'll never forgive the French for what they did to our language. So Þunorwyrm is another kind of... Actually, let's take this fucking cape off. Þunorwyrm's another one of those kind of more fantasy designs, but it's not actually really. The actual axe head itself is based off of a Russian axe design, and it's got a pretty large hammerhead on the other side, so it does... I guess I could, if I really wanted to, give it some blunt damage as well, but no fun in that. But if it isn't obvious by now, the Þunorwyrm is a lightning-based weapon. Just in case the massive amounts of electricity popping off of it didn't make that clear. But I decided that I was kind of looking at things that were missing, and there's not really any weapons that do lightning damage, which is a shame, because, I mean, lightning damage is kind of cool. It's fucking lightning, man. I don't really need to explain it that much. And then it was also... I also kind of realized that it's, my idea with it, like, my thought process for designing this weapon was, there's not a lot of things that use serpent scales. You're going to kind of see this logic come up a lot, in terms of just, I've found some resource that does not get utilized a lot. Like, serpent scales, I'm fairly sure, are only used for the serpent scale shield. So if you wanted to have, like, literally anything else, then sorry. Like, it's just a shield. We'll just end up with a pile of them. So, I tried to kind of reflect the scales on it, make it a little bit more Monster Hunter-esque. It's a neat little weapon. It's probably the first of the special effect quote-unquote weapons that you're going to run into, just because it has a pretty unique ability. So it's otherwise a standard axe. It does about 90 lightning damage or so. But when you use a secondary attack, you summon lightning. And the fun thing about the lightning summons is it can cut down trees, which I think is fun. Let's look at true trees there. Nice. And it can also mine rocks, as I miss apparently. See? It's cool. Like all of the special effect weapons, using the secondary attack chews through about 10 durability, so you can't use it all that often. It's kind of a balancing mechanism I copied wholesale from the first Dark Souls, using durability to kind of mitigate the special effects of certain weapons. Because I did not want to go through and program in like a mana or cooldown system for for just some fucking weapons. It did not sound like a fun time, and it didn't really fit with Terraheim's more or less kind of vanilla plus aesthetic. That's kind of, well, it's kind of drifted a little bit from that. It's more vanilla plus now, I'd say. But Þunorwyrm's interesting. The name, it literally means Thunderworm or Thunder Serpent, which I think is nice. Also noted here is the might of Thor, which is, yeah, it's just that Thor. It's just the Anglo-Saxon spelling for Thor. So, there you go. It's a nice weapon. I'm a fan of it. Let's see, what else do we got? Cover all those. Oh yeah, the Firebombs. Or the new bombs. So yeah, I added in a bunch of different bombs way back at the start of this mod, more or less. Because, one, having bombs is fun. And two, the... that's a kick. And two, the... what do you call it? I'm not a fan of the ooze bomb. Like, it's nice for area denial, but it's not quite as punchy as I'd like. So yeah, this is the Firebomb. It's okay. It's kind of in between the ooze bomb and the more instant damage of the Frostbomb. I do need to go back and update the particle effects, because one of the Flametal Weapons has essentially the exact same kind of lingering puddle effect as the Firebomb, but it just I redid the particle effects for it, and it looks so much nicer, and I need to go and essentially backport those particle effects to the Firebomb. Let's see, there's also, but the Firebomb, it's a 4-meter AoE with 40 fire damage, and the puddle lasts for about 5 seconds and deals that 40 fire damage every 1 second. So it can potentially do a lot of damage if something's not moving very quickly, but against smaller enemies, it's probably not the best. So next up, we got the Thunderbombs, or lightning bombs. Let's actually spawn lightning a couple. There we go. These ones were kind of interesting. It was kind of hard to kind of think about what their niche is, because the Frostbomb ended up being just the pure damage one. And so yeah, sorry, I needed to have a quick sip. And so the Thunderbomb ended up being kind of a more utilitarian one. Well, utilitarian is maybe not the right word, but more utility-based. So what it'll do is, if I spawn some boys to hit, great, or oh, that's way too many. Spawn a bunch of them. So the Thunderbomb, it really knocks enemies around. It's kind of a crowd control weapon. It's got a lot of stagger values to it as well. As much as I could give it, it's kind of hard to control that in the case of bombs and AoE stuff. But it's more just kind of utilitarian, good for knocking things around. It does also have a really big AoE effect, and it's also fairly cheap to craft. Fairly, it's not super cheap. It's a little bit. And then we got the Frostbomb. The Frostbomb is literally just damage. I cannot throw this to save my life. I quite like the effect. I think the particle effect for the Frostbomb came out the best of the bombs. It's a nice little weapon. Fun thing to play around with. Actually pretty handy to have a couple of those when you're trapezing through the swamp, just because it'll slow everything down and give you a little bit more time to react to everything, which is nice given how horrible the swamp is on the best days. Let's see. Oh, we got the Blackmetal Bow. The Blackmetal Bow. My logic with bows was always kind of interesting, I suppose, because frankly speaking, in the base game, archery is very, 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 very good. I would argue probably being an archer is the optimal way to play in the original game, because it keeps you very safe, it's very stamina efficient, and it does basically the same amount of damage as you could do if you were just up at the enemy beating him to death with a club. The only, I guess, downside of archery is it consumes ammunition, but considering that most arrows aren't super expensive to make, it's really not that big a deal. And so when I made the Blackmetal Bow, I kind of took a look at the Draugr-Fang, which was kind of my idea. Like, I didn't want to just make the Draugr-Fang but better, because the Draugr-Fang was already more than sufficient to deal with whatever threats you ran into the plains and beyond. So when I added the Blackmetal Bow, I decided that in kind of contrast to the Draugr-Fang, it's going to do less. It's going to do less damage, if that makes sense. But it's going to fire a lot quicker. I think it's only got like a 1.5 second draw time, which is exactly half of that of the Draugr-Fang. And so this is a very more nimble bow, and it's actually, I actually quite like to use it for that reason, even though it does less damage, just because it lets you kind of keep on your toes. The actual bow itself is based off of a Native American design, as I desperately try to remember what it's called. And the forward prongs, so to speak, the forward prongs you have there don't actually increase they don't significantly increase the draw weight of the bow. Instead, they make the curve, like the amount of power you have to put into drawing the bow, smoother, if that makes sense. Like, it makes it easier to pull back a higher draw weight bow. Okay, let's see, what's it called? But so when I came up with the idea that this thing should be faster firing, I thought, well, you know, the double bow is kind of a cool looking design. Oh, it's a Penobscot bow. That's what it is. That's what it's called. But it's the beep boop boop. Fucking brain stopped responding. Sorry. But the Penobscot bow really kind of helps you draw back higher weight bows easier And so I figured that'd be a pretty nice design for a faster firing weapon. I think it came out looking pretty sick. I've got a friend who's a bowyer, and he said it looks pretty good, so I figure that was a good enough call to say this thing is realistic enough. But I like it. It's good bull. Let's see, what do we got up next? Oh, the Greatswords. So the Greatswords, these came about because, well, in the very first release of the weapons for Terraheim, I added a weapon called Folcbrand, and Folcbrand originally was supposed to be the Blackmetal, or not Blackmetal, what the fuck? The silver Greataxe. When I first made the model, I was like, oh, I'll just have it be a sword. That'll be cool. And so what ended up happening is I was adding the weapon in because this is actually the first weapon I added to the game, Folcbrand. I discovered, ooh, I can actually play around with a lot of different stuff and make this thing pretty unique in how it operates. And so when it was first, and so when oh gosh, and so when it was first released, ended up having the same moveset as the straight swords. And this is actually reflected in the fact that Folcbrand's got its own kind of, its name doesn't follow the naming convention of the rest of the Greatswords, which are Greatsword and then the material, and instead is a sword, Folcbrand. And so it originally started off just being the straight sword moveset, but I ended up moving away from that because, well, it was too fast, if that makes sense. It was too fast, and it just didn't really... I got a lot of good feedback about it, and people didn't really like how it performed and how it looked when it was like that. But I didn't want to just make the whole Greatsword class, because when I went through and reworked the Greatsword, I didn't want to make the whole Greatsword class just the battle axes, but with a slightly different damage and stamina value. Because, well, frankly, that's kind of boring. It's like, I already added in all the other Greatswords, and so that would mean that the only difference, the functional difference between weapons is just aesthetics. And, I mean, yeah, it looks cool, but, I don't know, I don't think that's really worth the effort of adding an entirely new section of items if they perform the exact same as another section of items. So Greatswords in their present iteration have the same swing moveset, or I guess primary moveset of battle axes, but with the notable difference that they are considerably faster. And we can switch to the Flametal one so you can kind of get a good comparison. And so they got, this kind of gave them a neat little niche that, by giving them essentially the same moveset of his great axes, but a little bit faster, and then tweaking some stamina and range values, you ended up with this weapon that kind of fills a niche in between Atgeir's and the great axes in terms of damage and mobility and reach, because Atgeir's are very, very mobile weapons compared to battle axes. They don't have nearly that same amount of commitment, and so Greatswords kind of end up being kind of the middle ground commitment weapon, where you're not locked into a really long swing here, but you have, but you've got a still pretty lengthy swing. You gotta commit to it still, but not as much, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's a bunch of different weapons in this whole classification. We've got, of course, Folcbrand, which is the silver one. It's what I've got right now. The sword itself is, again, leading into that silver is more medieval, Renaissance-y kind of aesthetic. And so it's It's an Oak Shot Type 18B, which is my absolute favorite kind of sword. So it's got this very long, tapered blade. It's very good for stabbing, but, you know, it looks good. Oh, I forgot to mention the secondary attack for Greatswords is this nice big old pickaxe slam that does quite a decent amount of damage. Since it is actually literally just the pickaxe slam, you've also got the tertiary effect that it'll deal extra damage when you're above whatever you're hitting, because, I don't know, that's just the thing that's baked into that moveset. I think it's neat, so I'm not going to change away from it. Yeah, I don't know. It's neat. I like it. Let's see, what else we got? We got the Iron Greatsword, so let me just spawn that guy in. Okay, so the Iron Greatsword is it's technically a fantasy blade. There's never been really an example, because it's a Viking style sword. If that's not immediately obvious from the hilt and the pommel design, but there's Vikings and kind of, I guess, migration era peoples did not use two-handed swords pretty much ever. There wasn't enough, I guess, knowledge, I suppose. There wasn't enough, their economy wasn't built up enough to support the creation of such weapons, and a lot of the more in-depth metallurgical knowledge for creating these long two-handed weapons and just kind of long bits of metal in general was lost with the Roman Empire, actually quite a bit before its fall. So you don't ever see these this kind of weapon anywhere. That being said, I do think it's a cool design. It's just not very historical, but I mean, it's a fucking video game. Who gives a shit? Me, apparently. Another fun little thing about it is, for the description for it, I decided to just make it some kennings, because I'm a sucker for it, and also because I don't know, I needed a description, and I thought it'd be cool to throw some good old Viking and Anglo-Saxon poetic license in there. So they really liked kennings, which was essentially combining two different words to mean a different word. So like sea steed would be a boat because it's a horse that goes on the sea, you know, stuff like that. So for like swords, you'd have things like bloodworm or wound tool, which I think is edgy, but it's cool, so who gives a shit? Not me. Let's see, what else do we got in terms of greatswords? Oh, the Chitin Greatsword. Oh, the Chitin Greatsword was an absolute fun thing to make. This is actually based off of a historical weapon. It's some Bavarian Elector prince. Hold on, I'm going to pull up an image. Some Bavarian Elector prince in about Renaissance era Germany decided, man, those sawfish that I've heard things about in like the Far East or whatever sure do have some cool noses. I'd love to have a sword made out of them. And then he did. And it is one of the dumber things that has ever been made in Germany, but also one of the cooler things. So there's actually a couple different ones. This one's the exact kind of inspiration for the one that ended up into Terraheim. But there's at least 2 or 3 examples of this just strange weapon. I don't think they ever used it as a weapon just because it's huge. That is like a man-and-a-half sized sword. Maybe Gruta Piet could use it, but I'm not him, so who gives a shit? But in terms of Terraheim, like game mechanics, it's a side grade to the normal iron sword. The idea behind it being that there's, for a lot of different weapon types, there's not a lot of options in terms of the damage that you do. And so I figured it'd be kind of neat to have something that's a little bit different for the iron tier, and it also gives another use to chitin, which is another one of those materials that's woefully underused as of in Valheim nowadays. And so its whole shtick is it does a bunch of pierce damage and a little bit of blunt damage, and absolutely no slash. And it's made mostly with chitin and some iron. And I don't know, it's a neat looking weapon. Pretty brutal looking. I like it. It's cool. Big ol' sawfish sword. Ooh, okay, so then we got the Blackmetal Greatsword. That is this thing. Now, this thing, if you've never seen one before, and I'd be kind of shocked if you have, is a pretty archetypal, however the fuck you say that word, pretty archetypal example of a flamberge, which was a Renaissance era weapon. Or, well, not really a weapon. It refers pretty much exclusively to the blade and its kind of undulating pattern. At some point in time, someone decided, hey, having a wavy sword would be really cool. And so they made it, and then there's some manner of debate as to how true this is. People got it into their heads that having that wavy blade design causes a lot more. Well, it's like when you have like a serrated edge on a knife, it cuts easier. It's kind of like that. So that kind of same logic that it would like bleed out people more efficiently. And so you see it pop up in all sorts of places. You've got like normal one-handed swords with flamberge blades, but more famously, they ended up quite frequently as two-handed versions of Zweihanders or Beiden-handers. So, yes, it's a neat little weapon. It's just a great sword that does more damage, you know, black metal tier damage. So 110 slash, it's pretty powerful. Looks pretty cool too. I'm quite a fan of it. It should get around to retexturing the hilt at some point in time. I'm not a fan of the wood coloring there. It just doesn't look that great. Oh well. Something for later. Yeah, and that covers pretty much all of the great swords outside of the Flametal tier. But I'm going to cover all the Flametal weapons, like, at the same time, because, holy shit. There's a lot going on there. Let's see. Oh, Pridwen. Or, not Pridwen, the Parrying Dagger. I'm going to get to Pridwen later. So, spawn, dagger. Okay. So the Parrying Dagger's fun, because, well, it's a shield, but it's also a dagger. Someone recommended, or someone requested I make this on the post section of the Nexus page, and I thought, yeah, fuck it, why not? That sounds cool. And so its whole gimmick is it has one block power, but just an absolute insane amount of parrying force. You can't, or parrying bonus. It's got like 30 parrying bonus, as you can see there. So that means you can actually block pretty effectively with it if you parry, but otherwise you're just gonna get essentially hit for the full amount of damage. Which is it's neat. I like it. It's a good little weapon. It did kind of give me the idea that maybe I could add in like a two-handed weapon type, where essentially you've just got like, oh god, you know the push blades? I can't remember what they're called, but those kind of push blade Indian style weapons. I think they might be katars. You basically just have two of them on, and you use the punch moveset with them. And if you have one in your offhand, it boosts the damage of the other one. I don't know. That was my thought. It's a very hacky way to do it, but it could be done. I might get around to doing it. I don't know. It doesn't really fit the aesthetic of the game at all. So, in any case, that's the Parrying Dagger. Let's see, what do we got? Ah, the Blackmetal Axehammer. This is a fun thing. Okay, so the Blackmetal Axehammer, it's yeah, it's. I think I mentioned it earlier. It starts off as a. It started off life as just the battle axe for the black metal tier, but I changed it so that its secondary attack is this nice pickaxe slam, or the sledgehammer strike, just because, well, I thought it'd be cool. And then some people wanted like an actual proper battle axe after I changed it, and I was like, all right, sure. But the Axehammer itself is it's based off of a find in the Sudan-Hu grave, that big old famous grave site in England. It's the one famous for its that. Hold on, you got the Sudan-Hu helmet. And there was a lot of debate over what exactly, but it's from the same gravesite that they found this helmet from. It's a neat little helmet. He's got a little happy face. He's a fun little dude. But it's from that same gravesite, and there was a lot of debate as to what the actual, and like the scholar side of the community, as to what the actual purpose of this weapon was, because it was like the shaft was entirely metal and it was very, very heavy, and so they're like, it could be like a cavalry weapon, but they're like, nah, they didn't use cavalry all that often. And then eventually, I think the thing that people, like, I think the two current acceptable theories right now is, one, it's a tool for making boats, or two, it was used to ritualistically slaughter cattle. So like, you'd smack them with a blunt end and then get them with the axe bit, and that was kind of the idea. And so they thought there was like some symbology applied to it. It was, in like real life, it's a horribly impractical weapon, but Valheim is not real life, so we get a cool axe hammer. It does blunt and slash. It's neat. Quite a nice weapon. Let's pull this over. Okay, so next up we got the throwing axes. The throwing axes were kind of a fun little fun addition, just because, well, bows and spears being the only weapon kind of sucks, because spears are a little too valuable to throw, if that makes sense. Like, I lost a pretty nice spear just chucking it over the side of the mountain by accident, and that kind of really sucked a lot. So I thought, hey, maybe there's a better way to do ranged damage with, I guess, ranged damage that's not bows. And so that became throwing axes. So throwing axes, their whole thing is they've got the same base moveset as a normal axe, but it does like absolutely no damage. It's very, very weak. I think it's got a lot of knockback though. It's been a while since I've actually smacked something with it, so let's just spawn a grayling real quick. Yeah, it does have a lot of knockback, so it does give you a little bit of options if they start pressing on you. You don't want that. But aside from that, they're differentiated in, they do okay damage, but they're very, very, very fast. Even compared to like the Blackmetal bow, they fire off real quick. They're fairly inaccurate. I'm just gonna throw this straight here, and you'll see that they have this really wide spread as to where they land. So they're not super accurate, so you're not going to be sniping with them. But they basically fall into this really nice kind of mid-range niche where they're really, really optimal within about this distance to that rock. You can get, of course, more distance if you're fighting larger enemies like trolls, but they really kind of fit in nicely there, and they're a nice little mobile alternative. They're, not to toot my own horn, but I took a lot of time trying to tweak these things to get them to feel just right, and I think I just nailed it. Another fun thing about them, this is a really minor one, but I figured it's nice to mention, is the particle drop effect for them I tweaked to be very, very prominent. So like, compared to like that stuff over there, it's not nearly as, I guess, blindingly obvious as this, because if you're gonna have a weapon that you're throwing all the time but can be picked up, you kind of want to be able to find it again. And so yeah, there's throwing axes for all the tiers. I believe most of them would just use a slightly scaled differently model of like the base game's axes. No, the throwing axe silver's got a different model. Hold on. So yeah, that's Warpaxka. It's a Francisca, which was again another one of those really common weapons that they used in the migration period. It's explicitly a throwing axe. It's a neat little weapon. Nothing too special. I don't think it's got any special effects compared to the other throwing weapons. I tell you what the name means, but I've already forgotten, so sorry. It will remain a mystery. Okay, I think that's all of the weapons that aren't flame metal, so I'm going to go ahead and cover the rest then. Or the flame metal weapons then. Starting off with the Flametal Greatarrow. I should cover this one with the bow as well. So let's go ahead and spawn in that. Spawn, bow, fire, TH. Okay, so Gwynttorwr. One of the things you'll kind of notice with naming for flame metal weapons is they've all got unique names, either based off of legendary items or just stuff that, well, actually all of them are based off of legendary items, with the exception of Gwynttorwr, which is Welsh, so I'm pronouncing it terrible. But quite a few different weapons are Welsh-based. In fact, the flame metal weapon from the base game, Dernwyn, is Welsh-based. But Gwynttorwr, I believe, if I remember correctly, literally means white wind, which I think is cool. It is also a flat-out, blatant, direct reference to Dark Souls. It is literally just the Dragon Slayer Greatbow. It is literally just the Dragon Slayer Greatbow from Dark Souls. In pretty much every respect, it's a really cool design, and I decided that I'm going to go through and add a shit ton of weapons to fucking Valheim, then I am going to throw in at the very least one Dark Souls reference. So that's what this is. It's the obligatory Dark Souls reference. To that extent, the Flametal Greatarrow is also it's the Dragon Slayer Great Arrows. Pretty much the exact same thing as well. But Gwynttorwr's effect is, aside from having a neat little draw effect because people were being absolutely blinded by the flames, and I cannot blame them, it is quite a lot of particles. Gwynttorwr's effect is whenever you shoot, you get an explosion. And you could not see that at all, because of reasons. But yeah, all the arrows shot by Gwynttorwr explode. Gwynttorwr also is incredibly dangerous. It's got very, very, very high damage, with 120 pierce. And then of course you can throw on some Flametal Greatarrows and get some just ridiculous amounts of damage. But of course this is tempered by the fact that while you're drawing it, you are completely immobile. And it takes about 5 seconds to draw. It is slow firing. It does a ton of damage though. It's a really cool weapon. The Great Arrows also have notably higher drop. So if I just aim right there and then shoot, it's still hit about there. But compare that to these wooden arrows I just got on hand. Wow, it does take forever. Which lands basically just very, very slightly below where where I was aiming. So I think it'd be a lot more noticeable on a more vanilla weapon. Actually, here, let me just fucking... Here. If I just use like a fine wood bow here, you'll see the drop pretty extreme. Yeah. It drops a lot. But that's those two. I'm quite a fan of them. They're cool weapons. So then we've got the Flametal Atgeir, which is Fire TH. Okay, so the Flametal Atgeir, visually, or it's oh god, I can't even fucking pronounce this damn thing. It's the Clamo Solas, which it's again, I think Welsh. No, I think it's Irish. In any case, it means like kind of sunlight blade or whatever, and it doesn't refer to an explicit legendary weapon, so to speak. It refers to kind of a class of legendary weapons that would come up like there was this. They had essentially this kind of story archetype that would play out over and over again in a bunch of different stories, and at some point in time, the hero would always get a weapon called that. It could be a bunch of different things, but it was always kind of a big old fire sword kind of thing. I took some liberties with it in that it's an Atgeir. Well, more specifically, a partisan, not an Atgeir. Which is why it's got those prongs up top, is because it's based off of the Renaissance partisan. Let me spawn some enemies so we can demonstrate its special effect. The special effect's cool. I'm quite a fan of it. I don't know what will survive. Probably some Draugr. Let's spawn like 5 of them. So the special effect for Solas is whenever you do that, they explode after a short amount of time. That deals a certain amount of damage. Let me just read what the actual amount of damage does. Yeah, it deals 10% of their current HP after just a little bit of time passes. Which is neat. I think it's a pretty cool effect. Let's see. So that's the Clamio Solas. Let's go ahead and spawn the next thing, which is the Axe Fire or Fosite. Fosite is I don't actually think there's not a lot of legendary axes, all things considered. For whatever reason, they just don't come up much in like legends. Well, there's a bunch of Indian ones, but the names for those don't really fit the kind of given aesthetic and I guess tone of Valheim, whereas something like Fosite definitely does. So Fosite is another axe that's based off of Russian axe designs, which is why it's this really long, thin, bearded axe with kind of just a little bit of a hook at the top. It's you can kind of see the starts of like a bardiche in it, if that makes sense. Like it's starting to become a bardiche, but it's got like a long way to go. But Fosite's whole thing is, if I spawn some Greylings, I will demonstrate. So enemies that are killed by Fosite explode after just a little bit of time, and deal, I think, half of their maximum HP is true damage. So this means that it completely ignores armor and resistance. It just does that flat amount of damage. So I think in the case of those Greylings, I think they got like 10 HP or something, I don't know. So whenever they exploded, they would do 5 damage to any enemy near them. And that can change. So if you've got a bunch of enemies on low health, you can potentially blow up the whole crowd with them. And because of that, I think it really kind of encourages a playstyle where you don't just focus down one enemy. Because if you can get a couple of them to explode at the same time, you can instantly kill other enemies and cause them to explode. So it really kind of encourages trying to essentially play dominoes with your enemies, trying to get them to all fall down at the same time. It's a pretty neat weapon in that regard. When I was first developing it, I seriously considered leaving it, or leaving it's the wrong word, allowing it to do damage to the player. And this was something that I just found is how the game works. When I spawn the explosion, it does also by default damage the player. And I seriously considered just leaving that because it's a little bit funny. But I decided against that just because what would happen is if you killed a boss, like say Atgeir or whatever, if you kill the boss, those things have a bunch of health. And then, of course, whenever you kill a boss, you always sprint to the corpse and like run around inside the corpse waiting for it to drop all its shit, because, you know, might as well. So what would happen is a player would kill the boss, run around the corpse, and then the corpse would explode and instantly kill the player. Which, while absolutely hysterical, really sucked from a gameplay perspective, so I had to change that. I don't know, it's a fun weapon. It's one of the weapons that I really like because it changes how you think about going through encounters. Like, it changes your mindset, and I think that's something I kind of want to encourage, just kind of different thinking in fighting, because it keeps everything from just being the kind of standard run-in, slog them to death brawl that is fairly common in this game. So next up we got, oops, didn't mean to equip that. So next up we got Ridill. Ridill is a Bardiche. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Let's see, who does that one? Oh yeah, so Ridill is another one of those. See, the problem is, there's a lot of legendary swords, and there's not a lot of legendary anything else. So, Ridill is another one of those weapons that, like, the name originates from a sword, but it's being applied to a battle axe, but fuck it. And so yeah, it's a Bardiche, so it's a fairly cool axe design as far as those go. But Ridill's a nice little battle axe. Its secondary effect fires out a little burst of fireballs. Fireballs themselves don't actually do a lot of damage. I think it's only like 15 each, but since there's 4 of them, it's about 45 damage. And since it's also a battle axe, you can just fucking spam them. Does burn through durability quick, but yeah, you know how it is. I like Ridill. It's a good weapon. I really probably should have done a little bit more looking so I could tell you guys like the historical context of it, but then again, I don't think people really give a shit, so who cares? Let's see, what do we got next? We got Carnwinin. Ooh, the first of the Arthur weapons. I guess I can just go through all of those at the same time. So Carnwinin is a neat little knife. It's based off of kind of the daggers that Landsknechts would use in kind of Renaissance era Germany. So it's got a, oh god, it's fucking impossible to get a good look at the hilt. Essentially it's got kind of like a little circular twisty hilt thing going on with it, which I think looks pretty cool. It's a pretty standard knife in most circumstances. It's got a leap. Whenever you hit something with secondary leap, it'll mark the enemy for death. In a similar manner to how it works for the Barbarian set. But it'll mark an enemy for death, and if you hit an enemy who's marked for death, they'll take about 200% more damage, which is pretty significant. And so someone raised the point that that effect doesn't quite lean into Dagger's whole stealth bonus thing, but I kind of disagree, because being able to boost your stealth attack damage, like if it was just something that really leaned into stealth damage, like the stealth bonus damage, I don't think that would be very interesting, because a lot of the times the stealth attack bonus stuff more or less instantly kill something. If you've built your character, you've got the troll leather cape, and you're really good at stealth, and you're using daggers and stuff, and you can probably one-hit most anything with that kind of sneak attack. But I don't think that's particularly interesting if this thing essentially guaranteed that. If that makes sense, I think that would be kind of boring because you'd get into the Skyrim issue of haha stealth archer go burr, where it would just be foolish to play the game any other way because almost like, a lot of mechanics builds towards that. But the idea behind the Marked for Death in that case is that it can either be used in two ways. The first is you can mark someone for death and then use the and then just kind of use that as a nice damage bonus for your general kind of smashing combo or mouse one combo. Or you could tag him with the leap attack and then switch to a more damaging weapon and hit him with that and do just a ridiculous amount of damage. And so that's another one of those things that it kind of encourages thinking about it, because if you're not a sneak attack guy, normally there's not a lot of reason to have daggers around. You're just not a good use for them, really. Maybe if you really wanted to close the gap, but it's just probably be a little more stamina efficient to just run towards them. But with Carwinin in the mix, it kind of gives even more traditionally melee-focused weapons. Like if you were using, say, Ridill, there would be a reason to use Carwinin because you could leap in, get him marked, and then smack him with Ridill and do a bunch more damage. That's Carwinin. Notably, I should mention, it is the dagger of King Arthur. Fat King Arthur. Again, it hails from the Welsh tradition because the French tradition really only cared about Excalibur, so, it is what it is. So that's Carwinin. Next up we got Mistletoe, which means mistletoe in, I think, Old Norse. Not sure, might just mean Mistletoe and mistletoe in, like, Norwegian or some shit. But it is the Fire Greatsword for the Flametal Weapons. So visually, Mistletoe is based off of Swift Sabers, which is to say it's got a very long, straight back with a nice curved saber-like blade. Its special effect is it's another one of the projectile weapons. It fires a big ol' AoE explosion, which is it's pretty alright. I want to say it's the most in-depth effect, but it is a very nice effect to have, just to give you kind of more tactical options. But Mistletoe is one of those weapons that's from like Poetic Eddas, and so as I mentioned in the description, it killed a dude called Siminger and about 420 men, which is nice. But it's a nice weapon. I don't really have anything too much to say about it, just because it's a fairly standard greatsword aside from that, and its special effect isn't too, I guess, groundbreaking. It's still an effective weapon though, and I quite like it. Okay, then we've got All Mace, which is the Flametal Mace. All Mace. So All Mace is based off of if you can zoom in, it is a pretty nasty looking flanged mace, which is a pretty common style of mace that you'd find later on in the medieval and Renaissance period. This one, I believe, is more Gothic styled than anything else. But its namesake is the mace of Archbishop Turpin from the Song of Roland, and that's a fun little story of just a bunch of guys being dudes, being stupid and not letting the rest of Charlemagne's army know that, oh shit, we're being overrun. Because, I don't know, Roland was a headstrong bastard. But Almace's whole shtick is it has the pinning effect from the Troll Leather set. So if you hit an enemy with its secondary attack, they'll be pinned for 8 seconds, and this means that they will be vulnerable to all damage types and have reduced movement speed. There is, of course, a cooldown on the pinning effect, just because otherwise you could just mash this, and they would literally never be able to do anything. And that's not very fun. So it's got a bit of cooldown. It's a nice weapon. It definitely falls into the category of a nice effect to have that does not change how you play nearly as much. Though, that being said, the big ol' swoopy attack does find itself being a little bit more useful, as opposed to just maximum spamming. Okay, so now we got the shields. The Flametal shields. Oh boy. These are probably the most in-depth models I have made ever. They took forever to make, and I think it was worth it. They came out looking so good. So starting off, we have Svalin. Svalin is well, one of the things you'll notice with each of the Flametal shields is their knotworks. With Svalin being more of a Scandinavian-style knotwork, and the other one, Pridwin, being more of an Anglo-Saxon-style knotwork. The major difference between them is the Scandinavian styles feature animals a bit more prominently, not much more prominently, but they're notably larger creatures as opposed to the more snaky noodles that you have in the Anglo-Saxon knotwork. A fun fact about Svalin is it has the runes, so to speak, on it actually do mean something. They are not just vaguely shaped runes. It is a line from the Anglo-Saxon poem Dior, which it's a neat little poem. I'm not going to get too into it, but so what it says is, I'm just going to take a quick drink of water here real quick. Oh, fuck. Okay. So what that says there is, what it means is, this passed away, or that passed away. This also may. So the idea behind it's essentially the same kind of meaning as this too shall pass, if that makes sense. And I thought that was a neat thing. But what it literally says is Thes Ophorode, Thesis Swamag. The Thes Ophorode being on the fiery side, and the Thesis Swamag being on the bronze side. As far as the effect of Svalin is you kill enemies, and as you kill them, their portions of their maximum HP is stored, and when you kill 4 of them, you get a nice little healing AoE effect that heals everyone within 4 meters, the average of the amount of the stored HP. Because I can't just store the normal amount of HP. Like, if I store the maximum amount of HP, you get way too much healing effects from it. So, by making it to a... Actually, let me just pull up the exact formula. Ah, yes. So it's the average HP to the power of 1 over 1.35. Which, if I pull up a quick little graphing calculator, you'll kind of get an idea of the curve for it. So it scales somewhat linearly, but not overly so. It notably, this kind of formula was chosen based on the fact that if you kill an enemy with about 200 health, you get about 50 HP back. which I think was plenty reasonable in the later half of the game when you're fighting things like the Fuelings, which have about 200 HP. That's Fallen. It's really neat. Its namesake, Fallen, is a little bit more ice-based, but fuck it, I already named it like this. It essentially was the thing that, in Nordic mythology, it was the shield that stood between the sun and the earth, or whatever the fuck it is, and essentially kept the world from getting incinerated by the sun. So yeah, that's Fallen. It's a cool weapon, or shield. I think it is my absolute favorite model I have ever made, so that's fun. Next up we have Prydwen. Which is the Anglo-Saxon style knotwork, and so you see it's a lot more thin and snaking than Svalin is. So the fun thing about Prydwen is it's another one of Arthur's weapons. Again, hailing from the Welsh tradition. So what this means is other weapons like Carnwynin or Rhongoliant, which I'm going to get to later, get a pretty significant damage boost. I'm fairly sure it's... yeah, Carnwynin gets an extra 5 damage. Yeah, it gets an extra 5 true damage, and Rhongoliant gets an extra 15 true damage. And that's just the secondary effect. Oh, I should mention, Svalin has a secondary effect of reducing damage from projectiles by 10%, which is nice. It's a nice little thing. But Prydwen, when you parry an enemy, it reduces their damage by 10% for 45 seconds, and it takes a minute of cooldown before you can redo that. It's not a particularly intense effect, but it is very nice, particularly when applied to bosses. It can really save your skin if you're being thorough on making sure that's getting applied. But yeah, it's a neat weapon, or shield. It did also take forever to make. I do really like this shield, just because you have 2 fucking stupid-looking snakes going around each other. Like, look at the face on that one. There's not a thought behind those eyes. Amazing. Yeah, so those are the Flamemetal shields. I'm just gonna get rid of them real quick. Let's see, what do we got next? We've got Ukon Viscera. Let's spawn that in. So Ukon Viscera. Hey, so you know how I was complaining earlier about how there's not a lot of axe-based names? Well, this one is actually an axe-based named, and it's on a sledge, because I guess I'm just bad at naming things. I don't know. I thought it sounded cool. But Ukon Viscera is it's a pretty, well, I don't know, pretty standard-looking warhammer. Nothing too particularly special going on with the model. The fun thing about the name, though, is it's for the Finnish version of Thor. This was his, Ukon Viscera is his axe. The Finnish version of Thor being called Ukko. And so the special effect of it is, when you smash it down to the ground, you get this nice big old burning pile. Which I think is pretty cool. Just fucking look at that shit. It's a nice thing. It's another one of those weapons that is very nice to have, but doesn't do a lot of changing how you play the game. And then on the complete opposite side of that, we have my absolute favorite Flamemetal weapon, which is Rhongoliant. Rhongoliant is a fun weapon, but this is name-wise, this is King Arthur's lance. Again, Welsh. This is another one of those models that I had lying around from that same Blade and Sorcery mod. Yeah. But its whole special effect is whenever you throw it, you teleport to wherever you hit, which is fucking cool. Like, it is by far and away my absolute favorite Flametal weapon, just because this is such a neat way to. It's such a neat effect, as I desperately try to think about. Because it can be used in a bunch of different scenarios. It can be used for kind of platforming. It can be used to close gaps between enemies, or to escape and catch yourself a breather. It can be used for just normal traversal if you want. Like, it's got uses, and I like it. Yeah. It is my just absolute favorite weapon that I have added, just for that reason. So cool. Let's see. Oh, we're almost at the end here. Since this thing's already like a fucking hour long or so, I'll probably have to do the armor part in another half. But yeah. So let's see. Let's go through Tyrfing, which is the Blackmetal Throwing Axe. It's nothing too special. It is still neat to have, though. Tyrfing is a throwing axe, obviously, but instead of using ammo like the other throwing axes, Tyrfing is Tyrfing uses durability, so it's kind of nice. It means you have to carry it a little bit less, and I think it's a nice little capstone to the whole throwing axes. Definitely not the most unique effect, though, but yeah, well, who cares? It's nice to have. Let's see, we only got a little bit left here. Oh yeah, let's talk about salamander fur. So salamander fur is a material that I added in as of this latest patch, as I cannot fucking spell it, apparently. There we go. Okay. So salamander fur is something I added in as this latest patch, primarily as a material to upgrade capes and armors to the Blackmetal tier stuff, but it also has a secondary use in the Þunorwyrm axe. You use it to craft that, and so salamander fur is made with some Certling cores, some linden thread, and some chitin. Again, to kind of utilize some more underutilized stuff. Mostly chitin. Chitin's really depressing. Because well, once you get the javelin, there's not much point in continuing on to get excited about finding leviathans and the chitin they have. It's just like, ooh, more chitin. Time to shove that in a chest somewhere. Forget about it. But salamander fur is fun because it's actually based off of real life material that is notably known for its resistance to fire, and was it was a party trick back in the Middle Ages to basically have this cloth that got all dirty, and you would just chuck it in the fire and pull it out and it'd be clean. And because I think Aristotle's an idiot, who said that, like, salamanders, you know, those soft little amphibians, have an affinity for fire for some reason. People are like, this must mean that it is the fur of a salamander, despite salamanders not having. I don't know. It's a mess. I don't know why they decided to call it that, but it's just what it is. But nowadays, we might more readily recognize salamander fur as asbestos. Because it's just asbestos. So that's fun. So once you're up to Flametal tier, you might be entitled to some financial compensation, because you are definitely getting mesothelioma from all the asbestos fibers in your reforged clothes and cloaks. Yeah, and with that, I think that's gonna wrap up this incredibly long, ranting, rambling video. I hope whoever made it to the end finds this interesting. All three of you, because holy shit, I don't think I can stand to listen to an hour and a half long rant by some dude talking about something. But yeah, in any case, thanks for listening. I'll probably see about making a video that goes into about as much detail for the armor sets, so that'll be a fun thing to look forward to, you weirdos with too much time on your hands. Okay, fine. In any case, see you guys later.